I had never thought of a quilt as being a work of art, but a recent visit to the San Jose Museum of Quilts and Textiles changed my mind about that. Today we'll learn about the history of quilt making, and we'll view 46 spectacular examples of the quilt maker's art that are a part of Quilt National 11. Curator Deborah Corsini writes, Quilt National 11, the 17th biennial juried exhibition, is the quintessential showcase of contemporary art quilts. It presents the broad representation of the art quilt medium in all its range of styles, techniques, and multifaceted contemporary expressions. Its purpose is to carry the definition of quilting far beyond its traditional parameters and to promote quilt making for what it has always been, an art form. The quilts selected for Quilt National 11 have never been exhibited or published before their premiere showing in 2011 at the Dairy Barn Art Center in Athens, Ohio. This portion of Quilt National 11 features 46 works by national and international artists, including some Bay Area residents. These are just a few of the amazing, well-crafted, meticulous, and rich quilts that comprise Quilt National 11. The art form continues to transcend, expand, and embrace creative possibility and unlimited imagination.
Without our great volunteers, our shows would not go up in such an amazing and quick way. This was really a whirlwind, and we did it in record time. It's a beautiful show, so I'm really excited to have you here to see the final. All the details are done. So we're going to start out in the hallway, and this is a show that Nancy Bavor, our guest curator, organized, and so she's going to start and talk about that.
And I wasn't nervous until I saw that it's going to be recorded. Because of course you're all friends. So I'm going to talk about two loosely related, but actually more interrelated than I even thought, exhibitions before I started putting the show together. The first one is Creating Community, and the second one is Quilts as Women's Shelter. And the Creating Community section is from quilts from the collection, Historic Quilts. And the Quilts as Women's Shelter is a unique combination of community organizations. Quilts and community have long been associated with each other. We think of 19th century quilting bees. We think of the communities that made quilts for all the Civil War soldiers because the government did not supply blankets or really anything for the soldiers. So both the North and the South communities sent off quilts with their sons, fathers, brothers, nephews. Very few of these survived because they were often buried with the soldier or they were destroyed in battle. But I'm going to start talking about the unique communities. I'm going to back up. The quilts you're going to see all serve a purpose. That is one thing they have in common. The historic quilts from the collection were really commemorative. Sometimes they commemorated an individual, sometimes they commemorated a community. And the second group of quilts we're going to see really serve a more therapeutic purpose. So I'm going to start with the oldest quilt in this exhibition. Why don't you come on back so you can see? Called the Bible Verse Quilt. I think she really made it. It was kind of a trousseau quilt for her hope chest. Anna had her friends and relatives make these little blocks. Most of them have Bible verses. A lot of them have names and dates, and they date from 1852 to 1858. Now, Anna married a local school teacher, and he left Maine in about 1863 for California via the Isthmus of Panama. She joined him a couple of years later traveling overland on the Oregon Trail, and this was one of the precious objects she brought with us. She lived in Oakland and died there in the 1880s. In the 1980s, when California was doing its California Heritage Quilt Project, this was one of the quilts that was discovered as having California history. And so it is very well documented, and it actually appears in Jean Ray Laurie's book, Ho for California, about the California quilts. Now, I mention that because behind us is a quilt, and each block is made by a different California guild, and this was a fundraising quilt, different kind of community, a community of associations, a community of organizations. And this traveled the state. They sold raffle tickets, and the winner eventually donated it to the museum. But it was a fundraising quilt to support the California Quilt Heritage Documentation Project. So funds raised from this quilt were used to document quilts like this quilt. And I just love that coincidence. This was a quilt that several board members in the 1990s from this museum made to raise funds for a capital campaign. And again, a common thing in the 19th century as well as the 20th century is they sold space on the quilt. And you'll see there are just literally hundreds of signatures, well-known, some not so well-known, of people. And in the 19th and 20th century, these were often called dime quilts because you paid 10 cents to have your name on there. Then they would raffle off the quilt. And so you had a double fundraising duty. One more contemporary quilt that's a commemorative quilt. This was made for Irwin Bear, who was president of KMVT Textiles, and it was to celebrate the 30th anniversary of P&B. And again, a lot of the employees of KMVT Textiles, as well as quilt makers and quilt designers, signed it, and our own Deborah Corsini is right here because she was working for P&B during that.
And I want to say that Irwin was a board member and real supporter of this museum as well.
Thank you, thank you. Okay, so and one last quilt. I'm not quite sure the origins of this quilt. I know it's from Nebraska, but you'll see that there are names and base softball positions. Women's softball was very big in the 30s. In fact, it was bigger sometimes than men's baseball and drew more crowds. If only. And so you'll see some names and their positions. I don't know if this was made for someone leaving the team as a fundraiser for the team. I just don't know. But it's fascinating to look at all the names, many of which have Czech origin. And the several small towns around St. Paul, Nebraska, were settled by Czech immigrants in the late 19th century. There is a companion quilt in Nebraska that actually is on exhibition now at the International Quilt Studies Center, similar pattern, and I've been corresponding with a colleague there, and there is one name that overlaps, but just one name in that community. So, and then we'll go in here. So Quilts as Women's Shelter is actually the name of a program, and it's an unusual combination of three community organizations: the San Jose Museum of Quilts and Textiles, the Santa Clara Valley Quilt Association, and Next Door Solutions to Domestic Violence. And it's the brainchild really of our former director, Jane Prisby, and it's been going for a few years. And women who come to Next Door Solutions can participate in this program. And they meet every Wednesday night and learn how to make quilts. The association donates fabric, batting, a variety of things that the women need to make quilts. Members of the association and other community volunteers come on Wednesday night to help teach. The museum provides some support, and the association also provides some financial support. Next Door contributes to the rent, and so it's really this unique combination of community organizations. This is the first kind of quilt they start with, strip piece quilt. It's fairly simple, but what I love about this one is someone donated these Christmas blocks to the program to be used, and so the young woman liked those blocks, but she wanted to honor some holidays of her own. So St. Patrick's Day, Valentine's Day, very appropriate, Halloween. And what I loved about this when I realized it is that when she finished it, she machine embroidered names of her friends and family, just like Anna Morse Thurston's quilt, all in the border to celebrate holidays. Now, the girl who made this is 13. Just like Anna Morse Thurston, 150 years later, a version of that. So, and then I'm going to just talk about one more quilt in this room, and it's do a 180 if you will. These are some other blocks that were donated by a supporter of Quilts as Women's Shelter. It was part of a patriotic online quilt block exchange. So as you know, sometimes with quilt block exchanges, a 6-inch block. We think we all have different rulers all across the country, so some were 5.5, some were 6.5. She did a good job figuring them all out. But what I love is what she said about the quilt was that I felt so proud of myself that I could finish something. I set out to finish it, I did finish it, and I'm so proud of myself that I could finish something. And I love that she took somebody's unfinished project, those quilt blocks from the exchange, and turned it into something glorious for her son, who is the firstborn American in her family. So on that note, Deborah?
You know, it's a really important project that we
Yes.
continue to do.
Yes.
And thank you for taking this on and being the curator. It was
Thank you.
wonderful to work with you.
And I hope you
again.
will come back and read some of the comments that the women made, because it really, I think it strikes to the heart of why we all like making quilts, why we're drawn to it, why we're drawn to historic ones as well as contemporary ones, and why this program is important. It really does change their lives.
Okay, we'll move on into the main galleries. Let's go into the big gallery.
Looks great.
Was that okay?
Yeah, I have a blog, but I'm also, and I think it comes maybe a candidate
Hi, I'm Deborah Corsini. I'm the curator of the San Jose Museum of Quilts and Textiles, and welcome to Quilt National 11. I'm going to talk about this beautiful quilt by Marion Williamson. And it's a lovely pastel abstraction. And she uses a fusible lace, a soluble fusible lace that when it's in water, some of it fades away and the stitching is what shows. So this is a very intricately stitched piece with lots of wonderful abstractions. It almost reminds me of Monet's watercolors. Over here we have a very different kind of quilt by Mary Beth Frison. It's called Solving, and it's a quilt that's made of patchwork. So it's triangles of yellows, a triangle of yellow in a square of two other pieces. And it's very intricately pieced. And the quilting on it is just amazing. It's machine quilted, and it's got these wonderful swirls and things. So you need to see this quilt from afar to see the movement of the yellow shapes amidst the pale blue background, and then to look closely and see the beautiful detail of the quilting that gives it this amazing texture.
You're ahead of the game. Sometimes it takes people a life.
This is a quilt by Nancy Corday, and it's called Crazy Dang Jeans. And it's done, she freehand cut this with a rotary cutter, and she's using commercial fabrics. So they're commercially dyed fabrics, and they are freehand cut, and then she pieces all of these stripes together and puts them together. So in a way, it's a variation of some kind of log cabin. It's a contemporary log cabin. It's wonderful ladders. Your eye really moves all over the quilt. It's just, the colors are really beautiful. It's a vibrant piece. A piece that's different but also composed of patchwork is Pat Bulge's Compatibility. And to me, this quilt has a kind of 50s coloration. It's got an old-fashioned, well, it seems to have a 50s sensibility in terms of the pinks and the oranges. And somehow color always comes back into vogue. And so, you know, you look at this piece and it's very contemporary. And she, again, is using irregular shaped squares and composing this wonderful abstraction. It's got beautiful machine quilting in it as well that gives it added texture. So some of the pieces are machine quilted with the shapes of the piece, and then other pieces have much more variation. So, you know, I think the show is really dazzling, and it's just a thrill to see the variety. What strikes me about this particular show, it's very abstract. There's a lot of surface design, and there's a lot of texture. Those are the elements that really stand out. There are well-known artists in the show, like Susie Schei. And Susie's work has been, we've actually shown her work here before, and her work is just this magnificent, you know, imagery she paints on. It's a whole cloth quilt that she paints on the piece, and then she has this amazing writing. And, you know, just reading little bits and pieces of it, it's her life. I mean, she just spills her heart out. And I just love her work. This one is called Stars on the Water, the Oil Spill 5 of Paring Knives and the Kitchen Tarot. So a lot of the artists are also dealing with what's going on in the world, you know, ecology, global warming. And I think when you look at some of these quilts, and you have to look beyond sort of the surface and kind of see the intent underneath it. Another artist who's actually a local artist whose work really stands out to me is this beautiful piece. It's by Sunnyvale artists. So we actually have 3 local artists in this exhibit. And it's called it's Farmer Brown by Tanya A. Brown, and you have to get up close to see it. The detail of it is just amazing. It's a beautiful portrait. It's painted on a whole cloth, and then, you know, the texture is in this amazing machine quilting that she's done. It's just phenomenal. And, you know, it's one of the few pieces that's actually representational in this room, or in the whole exhibit, because when you look at the quilts in here, so many of them are abstract. They're large, abstract, expressionistic paintings. But on the back wall is a piece by another well-known artist, Katie Pemberton and Malzapas. And her paintings are really like gigantic brush strokes. And they keep on going, like the centerpiece is framed by these outer frames, and it gets smaller in the center and bigger as you go out, like a little universe. I just love her sense of color and you know, how she can make fabric be so exuberant like a brush stroke, like an abstract brush stroke is just amazing. The piece next to it is also really interesting. A lot of the artists in this show are using different kinds of techniques. This is Betty Busby, Opposites Attract, and it's silk cabote with acid dyed, hand painted, hot knife, and fused. So apparently what happens is she's got 2 layers of fabric, and the hot knife sort of breaks away the one edge, and it gives it a clean edge rather than a raveled edge, and then the fabric underneath comes through. So it's one of the new techniques that artists are experimenting with. And, you know, that's one of the things that you see in the show. You see somewhat traditional patchwork-like things. I mean, there are quilts in the back that are obviously just patchwork pieces. There's a quilt over there that's a patchwork. But then there are so many other pieces that have kind of newer ways of creating fabric. And when I look around the room, I mean, there are very few pieces in the exhibit, in this whole exhibit, that are actually made with commercial fabrics. So, you know, as a former textile designer of commercial fabrics for the quilt industry, I always find that fascinating, how many artists are kind of like pushing ahead, at least on this Quilt National level, of artists who are you know, pushing the medium of what can be done and creating their own amazing, amazing fabrics. There are pieces that are appliqued on top very loosely. So when you look at a piece like this, it's completely, you know, done with raw edges, and it looks like it's although it's cut in a pattern, you know, the raw edges are showing, and it's hand stitched, and it's just a very it's an amazing texture. I think the beauty of our galleries is we get to stand back and see things from afar, but then you get to come up really close and look at this piece. This is by Judy Rush, and it's Portrait of the Youngest Girl, #1. So could you see the face in here? The nose, and a little bit of a mouth and the eyes. So I'm sure if we were to go around and ask everybody in this room, what's your favorite quilt? I think I missed one. The quilt I'm going to talk about is the one in the corner. It's just an amazing piece. I've never seen trapunto like this. J. Bentley Gaskins, it's called Solitude, and this image of a young boy with his overstuffed backpack, and it's, I guess, machine embroidered, and it's beautifully rendered. And yet, then you come and see it, and it's stuffed with this method of trapunto. So I guess that the stuffing of trapunto goes in through the back, but it's really a tour de force. And it's when you come in from across the room, you're just drawn to it. And she's also using digital photography. So it's that combination of techniques that's really wonderful. I don't know, is there any other thing in this, any other piece in this room I should talk about before we move on to the next? This large piece here? Yeah. Yeah, it's, again, you have to look at it close. It's layers of fabric. It's like it's appliqué by Ann Smith, Mother Me, Mother You. It is a figurative piece. She's got embroidery on it. It's very freestyle. It's very expressionistic. I believe I've seen her work before. Yes?
Because I talked to her and she talked about it. This is a piece that she put together when her mother she was taking care of her mother when her mother was dying. Mm-hmm. So that's why it says Mother Me, Mother You.
I almost see an elephant figure in it.
Actually, right in the center. Yeah, right in the center.
Yeah. We're wearing high heels.
Wearing high heels.
I think it kept her sane. If you've all taken care of someone at that stage.
And I almost see a baby carriage or something.
So
yeah.
I love the stories behind each one.
Yeah. I wonder what the elephant means, though.
You know, I don't remember. I just remember we all just started laughing when we realized it was an elephant. It just like struck us as
well, I think that elephants are very, you know, they take care of their children for a long time.
She's from the UK, I believe.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Well, there's also the other side to it of things that you don't talk about, but they're ragingly obvious, and that's the elephant standing in the middle of the living room.
That's really a good point. Really interesting point. Well, thank you for telling us that. Yeah. And she is from England, and there are artists in this exhibit from many different countries. And, of course, from all over the United States.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.